that's just come up saying continue with it being recorded. So that's worked.
Hello everybody, welcome. My name's Susan Halford and I'm currently President of the British Sociological Association, and it's my very great pleasure today to be joined by Professor Graham Crowe from the University of Edinburgh, who is the British Sociological Association's recipient of the Distinguished Contribution to Sociology for 2021. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you.
Graham will be known to many of you watching, if not all of you watching, I expect, for his contribution to sociology over a career that has spanned more than 40 years. He'll be known to you for the very diverse range of contributions that he's made through his own research, for example, in rural sociology, community life, research methods, and most recently for his work on later careers and retirement. In addition to his research contributions to sociology, Graham has been a tireless proponent of sociology and has taken a leading role in many of the key activities of organising sociology, including through the BSA, for example. And this is extraordinary, all the different things that you've done, Graham, over that time, as conference organiser, as summer school convener, as editor not only of one sociology BSA journal, the Sociological Research Online, but also of Sociology, a long-standing member of the editorial board for Sociology, and many, many other ad hoc contributions that Graham has made to the BSA over his time. There's also, and I think many of you who know Graham will have experienced this directly yourself, a whole host of rather less visible contributions that you have made, Graham, to sociology over your 40 years. And I just want to highlight from my own personal perspective that you have been a tireless supporter for early career researchers, both PhD students and early stage lecturers in sociology. And throughout all of that time, if I had to say one thing, it would be that you have had an absolutely persistent commitment to fairness and inclusivity in everything that you have done, and in fighting that fight for other people, when sometimes the way that academic life is done is not always about fairness and inclusivity. And I have seen you on many occasions fight that fight, both as someone who worked with you at Southampton for many years, but I know that you will have carried that way of working through everything that you've done in your life as a sociologist. And it's something that I think we should all be really, and I know we are all really, really grateful for. So thank you from me, from the BSA and from Sociology. And moving on, because of the strangeness of our life at the moment, doing everything online, it does mean that we have this opportunity to ask you a few questions about your life in sociology and to hear some of your reflections about sociology and your part in that over the last 40 years. So I'm just going to move on and ask you a couple of questions and hope that that gives you the opportunity to reflect a bit. Please put the questions, reframe the questions if you wish, and we'll take it from there. So my first question, Graham, is looking back over your very distinguished career in sociology, is it possible to pull out a few key highlights from that period of time?
Yeah, I think it is. And thank you for those kind words. Highlights, I guess I would, if we're doing it chronologically, my first single authored article was something that I sent to the journal Sociology, which is an article on the use of the concept of strategy, which came out over 30 years ago. And that was a highlight for me because it was my first single authored journal article, because it got responses. The editors were very kind at that time. Janet Finch and Nick Abercrombie were very kind and arranged for David Morgan to write a commentary on it. And then Claire Wallace subsequently responded, and others, and so that got a lot of attention at the time and really helped my career, and sort of I guess kind of helped me get noticed. But I think it's a highlight in another way, in that I was just checking ahead of this conversation about citations, and more than 30 years on, it's still getting cited quite healthily. And I think that's kind of interesting that, you know, the shelf life of the things that we do in terms of publications, they aren't over in a flash. And I think that's an interesting kind of reflection that sometimes things may be a little slow burn and then take off. So, but that would be a highlight because it has you know, if I meet people for the first time, they say, "Didn't you write something on strategies?" And it prompted by that, I generally say yes. And even Bourdieu cites it. So you know, that's that's my claim to fame, is that I wrote something that Pierre Bourdieu was happy to cite. So that was nice. The second highlight, I think, is I wrote a textbook with Graham Allen on community life, and that also generated quite a bit of interest. And I think textbooks are really an important part of the discipline of sociology. And John Scott, I know, has sort of written about that, about how we shouldn't neglect textbooks in the shaping of a discipline. It was nice to just know that was serving a purpose out there, was being adopted on a whole range of courses. And also because I just love the thing that one reviewer said about it, which I'm sure I've told you many times, but I'll go through once more, which the reviewer said that the book was exhaustive and only occasionally exhausting. And
all the best sociology is a bit exhausting.
Praise indeed. So that would be a second thing. Thirdly, thinking about the highlights and events are highlights in their different ways, and they sort of stick in the memory because of the intensity of the actual event, but also all the preparation that goes into it. I think of the several I've been involved with, I'd probably pick out the two National Centre for Research Methods festivals, which were held at Oxford in 2008 and 2010, when I had to follow the same event that had been previously organised by Angela Dale. And they were such sort of wonderful events because they oughtn't to have worked, in that they were bringing together people from across all the social science disciplines, across all the different methodologies, across all the sectors, across career stages and personality types, you know, and there's 700-800 people being brought together over 4 days. And it might have been a recipe for people just going off into their small groups, or it might have been a recipe for, you know, quite intense disagreement and conflict. But actually they were wonderful events, and it was really good to see people being brought together in that way. And for the people who were there, they may remember at St. Catherine's College, the meal times brought people into the big dining hall, and you had to sit next to whoever had sat down before you. So it really mixed people up. And I think that kind of feeds into what you were saying about early career researchers, because that sort of opportunity to strike up a conversation and meet with people outside of your group. And yeah, as is often said about conferences and other big events, you know, it's as much about what goes on in the parts of them between the sessions and over coffee and over meal times and so on. And so it was great to be able to kind of carry on with that tradition and to see what came out of that. And I think earlier this year, last month, the first virtual research methods festival was held by NCRM. So they're still going strong. But I do wonder, and maybe there's some research been done on it, on how different it is in those virtual fora, whether you miss those kind of interactions just standing in a queue for coffee or for meals or whatever. So, but anyway, the research methods festivals would stand out as a highlight. And then fourthly, I guess a highlight is just that sense of achievement when one of one's research students finally gets their PhD. There is a sense of sort of achievement through proxy, if you like. I mean, it's their achievement, but one has a certain sense of wanting to say, look, I told you so when you said, you know, I'm never going to finish this, or I don't know if it's any good. And then they've come through the Viva and been told that, you know, the examiners really liked it. There's a sense in which you're getting some sense of achievement and passing things on to next generation. So I think that would be, if I'm allowed, sort of the several highlights from all my PhD students over the years who've achieved that. I should say as well that I'm a hopeless person for sort of keeping quiet. As a supervisor, if you're sitting in on a Viva, you're supposed to not participate unless you're asked a question, and I find that very hard. But so there's a sense of further relief there, in that you can then talk again in that. But those would be the four things that I'd sort of pick out, just to cover the range of what sociologists do. There's publications, there's textbooks, there's events, and then there's teaching, supervision, and passing things on to the next generation.
Thank you. And it's notable that there is that diversity in the things that you pick out as highlights. I'm not surprised that you've chosen to do that across, teaching as well as textbooks, as well as your research, and I think your reflections on the NCRM conferences and St Catherine's, which I was lucky enough to attend myself as well. They were extraordinary events, and I tend to think you're right about some of the losses in the switch to online, particularly in terms of ECRs and having access to people they wouldn't normally meet, and also for everybody having access to people they wouldn't normally meet. That's harder to do online.
And sorry, just on that, I was really helped by the people who came and were the big name speakers, and I remember Charles Reagan came across from America to the Research Methods Festivals, and I wrote to him and said, would he like to come again, because he'd been such a success in the previous festival with Angela Dale. And I said, here are 5 ideas. And he said, I'll do all of them. And I said, well, no, because then you'll have a really busy schedule. And he insisted. So he did do all 5 things. And he was seen sort of running from one thing to another in order to fulfill this obligation.
Wow.
If you pick the right people who are keen to engage, and he was delightful and very much in that mold of wanting to talk about his interests to people at all career stages, and not being at all precious. And so we were very lucky in choosing the right people to come as plenary speakers and so on. Yeah,
but also setting the right mood and the right tone, and organizing it in the way that you did. So moving from that breadth of the highlights, looking across your career, I'm wondering if I can push you a little bit on if and how you think things have changed over that time, particularly if things have changed within sociology over that time, whether you've got any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I was an undergraduate in the 1970s, and then went from Oxford to Essex and was a postgrad doing a master's and then a PhD in the sort of late 70s, early 80s. So we're talking about, as you say, a 40-year period. And one of the things I've kind of been interested in throughout my career is those words ending in ization, the sort of long-term processes of how things change. And I guess one of those would be professionalization. And I kind of came into research methods mid-career, if you like, and was just struck, as that then became my main focus, by how much more professionalized research methods training was compared to my own experience. So as an undergraduate, I had 0 research methods training, which many people find hard to believe, that you could go through a whole undergraduate degree and have no training in research methods. But it was within living memory, because it's within my living memory. So I think there's been a professionalization in various respects. And I guess some of that is double-edged. Some people might kind of include in that the growth of monitoring and kind of regulation and formalization and so on. And I think that's clearly there. So with all the movements towards the research monitoring, both within institutions, but also through the ref and so on, and then also with teaching in some contexts. Working in Scotland, I can say that varies across the 4 countries of the UK. But professionalization would be something that's been there. Another ization would be feminization. I've been looking back at the history of the sort of changing position of men and women in British sociology, and was interested to see that Jennifer Platt's history of the BSA says that by the late 1990s, women made up the majority of BSA members. Now, I don't think that means that the majority of sociologists were women, because as we know, not everybody who's a sociologist is a member of the BSA. But that was a remarkable sort of shift from the period when I've been reading Anne Oakley's accounts of when she started out in sort of late 60s, early 70s, and just that whole sense of marginalization that she conveys really well. And so something happened to sort of shift both the balance in terms of numbers, but also I think the tone as well that's there. So I think that would be something that would stand out in any history, as it does in Jennifer's account of the BSA, and perhaps it's just an example of a wider kind of trend towards greater diversity. And one of the things I was pleased to do at Southampton was to have the opportunity, thanks to our colleague Gordon Causer, who kind of reconfigured the undergraduate curriculum and said, are there things that we might have in a new curriculum that might be a bit different, a bit exciting? And so I offered a course on disability, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made, was because it was such an interesting thing to do, but also because I think students found it good to have that engagement with something that's perhaps a little bit different, that wasn't in their A-level textbooks and so on, although it has made its way into textbooks subsequently. So that would be an example of, growing diversity within the body of sociologists and the sorts of things that sociologists talk about. And I saw a figure recently in working on this project on academic careers. I saw a figure which said that approaching a third of UK university staff, academic staff, have come from having been born outside of the UK. And I think that that's another kind of indication of, or another kind of way in which we might measure growing diversity. And if we think about the people who come as students, but also then those who are, in teaching positions in universities, it's a much broader kind of pool of people that are drawn on to teach sociology, to research sociology, and to kind of represent sociology. So that would be another ization, and I could go on. There's a much longer list, but I'll resist the temptation. Obviously, the point would be there to be made about growth, that in the 1970s, sociology was much smaller than now. But I'd kind of have a caveat for that, in that the 1980s was not a period of growth and expansion. In fact, John Holmwood talks about being appointed to the lectureship at Edinburgh in 1979, and I think that was the last full-time permanent sociology lectureship post for about a decade. So it hasn't been a linear process of continued expansion, and the 1980s was a tough time for sociology, and we have lots of people to thank for defending the organization there, including John Eldridge is, I think, often pointed to as someone who was really instrumental in bringing together people through the BSA to defend and make the case for sociology. But from the 1990s onwards, the kind of growth in numbers and just the kind of vitality and greater diversity of approaches and ideas and so on is remarkable. And then I guess the final thing I'd say about change is that it is tempting to talk about things as linear, as if there's a long-term trajectory. But I was reading Andrew Abbott's work recently, where he talks about things kind of coming in and out of fashion and having a much more kind of cyclical nature to them. And he talks about, with research methods, for example, how we can liken the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches in research methods to the game stone, paper, scissors, where everything there has a strength but also has a vulnerability, and these things come and go in terms of fashions. And so I think it would be easy to say there's lots and lots and lots that's new, and just occasionally I suppose people who've been around for as long as I have say, well, maybe that's not quite as new as it was then. And Herbert Gans has written a very nice piece about what he calls sociological amnesia, that occasionally there's a temptation for people to claim something that's new that perhaps is not quite so new. And that would certainly be true for community. I think that's kind of gone out of fashion and come into fashion. But it's been an interesting ride to see those various changes, whether they are linear or whether they're cyclical.
Yeah, and a privilege in some ways to be able to have that perspective and to see things. So thank you for sharing that, Graham. That's very thought-provoking. If I could ask you one final question, I'd like to turn the spotlight on the BSA, on the British Sociological Association specifically, and just ask you what part the BSA in particular has played over that time.
Yeah. Well, I think I've been mulling this over, and I think my first kind of encounter with the BSA was probably the 1980 summer school. So back then, and more recently, but no longer now, there were summer schools run for postgraduate research students annually, and this particular one was run by Jeff Payne and his colleagues at what was then Plymouth Polytechnic, which is now changed its name various times since then. But that was a memorable occasion where I was in the middle of my PhD fieldwork, and it was just so nice to go and meet other PhD students, and also various people who were eminent sociologists at the time. I remember John Rex was there and was entertaining us all by his account of what was going on in 1980. That was the time when the Solidarity movement and Lech Wałęsa was signing his agreement with the then communist government. But it was just such a great opportunity to meet people from other institutions and to just have people interested in what you were doing with your PhD. And I think, I haven't really looked back since then. And obviously you'll remember when we, with Sue Heath and Wendy Botterill, organized a summer school at Southampton. And it was just such there's just something very pleasurable about meeting with and hearing about what people are doing with their current PhD research, because that's gives a sense of how things are changing, but also some sense of continuity too. So I'm very grateful for the kind of encouragement that I got from that first summer school. And subsequent to that, I think I went to my first BSA conference was in 1983, and I think I've been to every one except for one since then. And that's just been a fixture, and it was it was never really a question about will I go, won't I go, or will I offer to do something or not. It was always, well, it's such an important place to be, and it's also such an important opportunity to get some feedback on ideas and to hear about what other people are doing, and to go through all those informal sort of conversations in the publishers' hall and so on. Yeah. So it's been great having that there as an opportunity. And with Graham Allen and Sue Heath and Jill Jones, we did run that in York in the year 2000 on the theme of time. And that experience really brought home to me just how much the Durham team do by way of organization, not just for the conferences, but it is such a huge undertaking. I think then we had 400 or so people, but it seemed a mammoth undertaking. And that was a great sort of opportunity to see the other side of event organization and to put together a program. So that was a great opportunity that came our way through the BSA. And then I've always had a soft spot for the journal Sociology, because they very kindly published my my first single authored article, and have found it a very useful journal. It's a great learning experience to be on the editorial board. When David Morgan was one of the editors with Liz Stanley, and I remember sort of took us through about the way in which we had the opportunity for early career researchers to maybe give them some extra pointers to maybe go the extra mile in terms of encouragement and identifying ways in which things can be developed. And that was a real learning experience being on the board. And then with Kathy Pope, we had the opportunity to have 3 years of editing the journal, which was also a learning experience, sometimes quite fraught, because you're obviously dealing with disappointment as well as with being pleased if you're having to turn people down. But not everybody who gets turned down sends an angry email. Some people say, well, thank you for that. You know, I'm disappointed not to be being published. But on the other hand, I'm really impressed by how, you know, the referees and the system has treated me. So with that, and with Larry Ray co-editing Sociological Research Online, which was a very different experience, because we used to, at that time, say we would publish everything that we had ready to publish. And so it came out quarterly. And so as soon as something was published, we had only 3 months and we had nothing in the bag. You know, we had only things that were in the review process, but there was a great anxiety about, you know, whether we would have enough, but we always had enough, because it was a very quick turnaround time. And I think it was a kind of an indicator of things to come. That was another learning experience about how, you know, publishing doesn't have to take a long time. I think the fastest we got something out was within 6 weeks of receiving the initial submission, it was out in the next issue, because it was reviewed, returned, revised, accepted, and there it was. So that was something that BSA facilitated by seeing that opportunity in the 1990s to have a new type of journal with new kind of things that could be done, in particular through links and through visual material and so on. Yeah. But I think in general, I think, you know, BSA has just been there as a sort of constant presence, really. It's a forum to meet with and to discuss and to get a sense of what's happening in the field, and to meet some really kind of interesting and dedicated and inspiring people who share that kind of passion for the discipline, and who want to, you know, want to make that case and make sure that sociology is there for subsequent generations. So altogether, you know, it's when I got the email from Judith Mudd saying that I was going to get this award, which I have here in front of me, I'm proudly holding it up. You know, that was just, it was completely unexpected, I should say as well. I had no idea I'd been nominated, but it was a real pleasure, because it's kind of just a recognition of a very interesting journey in which the BSA has played a part. Although, you know, another level, I'm going to kind of spoil it by saying that all those things were team efforts, you know, and none of them could one do on one's own. And so in a way, I feel like I should cut it into bits and share it, you know, with all the people who've participated in those various achievements along the way, because on our own, you know, we can achieve some things, but together we can achieve, you know, so much more when we collaborate.
I don't think that spoils it at all, Graham, for saying that. I think that's a testament to your approach and to your convictions about how we do sociology and how we practice. So that's a really good way to end. I just want to say thank you again for your remarkable contribution to sociology so far, because I hear a rumour that, you know, I don't think this is going to be slowing down very much. At least I hear a rumour that that's the case. And but there will be much more to come in the future. But for now, just congratulations.
Sorry, Susan, I missed that. I'm afraid you froze just at the point when you, after rumour, I then lost you.
Oh no, I'll say it again. I say your contribution to sociology so far, because I hear a rumour that you're not slowing down, particularly despite apparently recently having retired from the University of Edinburgh, and we really look forward to whatever else is to come in terms of your contribution to sociology over the coming years, as well as celebrating your contribution over the past 40 years, as we've just been discussing. So I was just going to end, Graham, by saying congratulations again to you for this award, very, very well deserved, and thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you for organising it and for giving me the chance to reflect on that that long period. It seems a very long time ago since I was a fresh-faced sort of postgraduate turning up at the University of Essex, but it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.